There we go. So we'll record this so others who can't be on the call can go back and listen to it later. And I think there's information within this. I think, Laura, you added some information on how to get to those recordings, that recording later, as well as the presentations. So without any more ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Laura, and you can just start with the process. Everybody should be seeing on their screen SDSU extension, some fire, and other stuff on her front page. So anyway, take it away, Laura.
All right. Thank you, Doug. And as he mentioned, I'm the state climatologist for South Dakota, based out of Aberdeen in the northeast part of the state, and an extension regional center up there. And sorry, Doug, I did not put in the link to where to find the webinar, but we can figure out here as we go through, and maybe you can post it in the chat or the questions box.
Yeah, well, I'll do that, and what I want people to do is find the recording, not necessarily the recording.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. All right. Go ahead.
So okay. So the picture there on the left is the Wombly fire, and that was down in Pine Ridge area earlier in July, I guess. And aerial picture there from David Martin, which I appreciate. He contributed a lot of the wildland fire information that I have here today. And so there I lead right into some of the folks that have contributed to this, whether they know it or not. I borrowed a map or some information from what they have from all three states, South Dakota, North Dakota, and Montana, from their National Weather Service. Their State Department of Agriculture was another one of them, and our regional climate centers and drought center in Nebraska as well. So several partners there that are always updating information on the drought situation across the region that I encourage you to reach out to. So here's a drought monitor map, and I'll show several different images or maps from the drought monitor. This was released just this morning, and so a little bit of change, especially in South Dakota. We had a fair bit of improvement over the last couple of weeks in our drought situation, given some beneficial rains we've had down here, but certainly the D4 or exceptional drought in the maroon areas is really hanging on there in Montana and North Dakota. And here's a regional picture here just of that three-state area, which is where we're focusing here today on the tribal lands in Montana, North Dakota, and South Dakota. So you can see the current drought monitor with those boundaries overlaid here on the map. And so kind of, you can compare and contrast which areas have been hurt worst. I'd say down in South Dakota here in the north central part of the state, over Standing Rock and Cheyenne River reservations, those areas have improved quite a bit. They were in the D3 or that red color area up to even just last week. Similarly, down in the south central part of the state, there's been quite a bit of improvement in that area as well. It's just a very small area of extreme drought on the current map. So I know it's been kind of ups and downs for some of us as far as getting worse or getting better on the last couple of weeks. Zooming into Montana just a little bit further, obviously northeastern Montana has been hit the worst this season over the last couple of months, but also in the western part of the state, just on the edge of Flathead Reservation area, that's now in D2, which is relatively new in the last few weeks, really, kind of degrading conditions out there in the mountain west of Montana. To kind of get a sample or a glimpse of what's been happening in northeastern Montana, we heard a lot of reports of pasture range forage conditions really poor up there. It's a major wheat growing region too, which I know isn't necessarily important to all of the tribal lands. But also looking just at rainfall. Here I have a graph looking at June and July rainfall, so those 2 months, June and July rainfall for every year from 1895 through the current year. And so looking at the very far right bar, itty bitty little bar, for that northeastern Montana region, about 1.3 inches of rain in that whole 2-month period, the driest of any year back to 1895. And certainly this includes, that Fort Peck reservation area. So this is just one example of the data that's really demonstrating, backing up some of the conditions that we're seeing out there. I understand Rick might also talk about some of the ecological impacts we're seeing as well. Looking at North Dakota now, their western part of the state, very similar situation where that D4 exceptional drought, that's 1 in 50 to 100 year type of event. So very rare, and certainly the worst we've seen in many years, at least since the early 2000s probably, if not way before that. And as I mentioned before, Standing Rock was one of those areas that was noted in drought early on, but now we're also seeing that further north and west. And then finally, South Dakota. I did mention a little bit about this where, again, this was an area that was showing drought early in the season, but it's gradually improved in the north, but also kind of gotten worse down in the southwest, and down in the Pine Ridge and Rosebud area. They've been holding steady or getting slightly worse over the last few weeks as well. So we're keeping an eye on there. I know there's been a lot of fire activity, a lot of reports of livestock impacts as well, as far as grasses and low water supplies. I also heard too, when I was down in Rosebud a couple weeks ago, they're imposing some water restrictions for household use, just given the demand of water that the water system way up in Fort Pierre can't keep up with the demand as well. So I know there's several communities, areas across the area that are now under water restrictions, and I hadn't heard that in North Dakota and Montana, but I'm sure that's the case as well. Just looking at the recent climate data, so a couple maps to share with you. This is for the last 60 days, so relatively recently, since June 11th. Looking at the difference from average temperature. So how much warmer or cooler from average have we been the last 60 days? Anything in the reds, oranges are warmer than average. Anything in the greens, blues, purples are cooler than average. So I know it's kind of hard to see the lines there, but the eastern Dakotas certainly on the cool side the last couple of months. I think that's really leaning towards the last couple of weeks where we've had some very, very cool temperatures. I know near record lows last week in some areas. But still, in western Dakotas and eastern Montana, well, most of Montana, showing, continued above average temperatures, continued warmth across that area, which is kind of making the drought worse, with the water shortage. And then you have heat on top of that. And then here, just looking at the rainfall, again, for the last 60 days, I showed you an example of what we've seen in northeast Montana, but certainly that's very widespread across Montana and into western North Dakota. Just recently, we've seen some good rainfall totals helping the situation in South Dakota, but still some dry areas there down in the south central, around Rosebud area especially. So we're keeping an eye on that situation too, if it does end up getting worse in the coming weeks. Just to show you a little bit on the drought monitor, how much it's changed just in the last month. This is a constantly evolving situation as the drought monitor is updated every week, every Thursday. And especially in the summer season, drought can change very rapidly, especially getting worse very quickly. And so the yellow areas are those that changed one category worse. When you're getting into the oranges, that's 2 to 3 categories worse over just the last 4 weeks. So that's a very rapid change, especially in Montana. You know, if you're changing 3 categories in a 4-week period, that's changing almost every week, and that's a rapidly degrading situation. Similar, we've seen that some areas in South Dakota have changed 2 categories as well, down in the southern part of the state. One of the impacts that I know gets a lot of headlines, and you know, wildland fire occurs every year in Indian country, but certainly drought years we see much more activity. And so this is some information I got from David Martin, who covers the Great Plains region up here. Just looking at the current season, the total of about 729 fires already for almost 11,000 acres burned. And there's a picture there from the Hilltop Fire from about a month ago. So it sure has been a busy fire season, but by all accounts from what I hear, there's been some really great firefighting out there, and that all the agencies are getting on top of them as quickly as possible, using all modes of attack from ground and air resources to go and get them contained as quickly as possible. Here's another picture from Cheyenne River Agency that David Martin had sent me from aerial reconnaissance that he did just last week, or about a week and a half ago, I guess, back in late July, which is the most recent large fire. That is a really good thing, because we're now getting into that season where fire activity does ramp up, but we've been relatively cool and relatively moist for some areas, so that's really reduced the fire risk, at least currently. Looking at some past years to compare to, you know, yeah, 11,000 acres sounds like a lot, but how does that compare? So that first line here on this table, that's just looking at the current year so far. So just through August 7th, when I got the data from David, you know, compared to 2014, which is a non-drought year, you know, about 6,000 acres burned that year. A lot more fires, 857 that year, but smaller fires in general. 2012 was the most active year that they've had in the last 11 years that David had data for. Certainly a lot of acres there burned, 125,000. And again, this is just in Indian country, doesn't count all other areas of his region. And very active, you know, over 2,000 fires that year. 2010, a non-drought year, again, a very low fire year. And then 2006 was a big drought year. You know, that period of 2002 to 2006, roughly, a rather extended drought season, those few years. And 2006 came in second as far as most active fire year, as far as again, on Indian country, as far as BIA and wildland fire goes. So a lot of connection here between wildland fire and drought, but there are fires, you know, almost every year as well. A couple of things. I work a lot with the agricultural sector and working with producers and landowners around our area. And a couple of resources I wanted to share with you. First is this feed and hay kind of exchange, if you will. There's a couple resources here. North Dakota and South Dakota have both set up basically like bulletin boards where people can post if they have hay or feed for sale, or if they desire or are looking for feed or hay or looking for a feed lot, something like that. So the top link is NDSU, their feed list. And then also South Dakota has one through Facebook. It's actually on Facebook, the SDSU extension Feed and Forage Finder. So those are two places where you can find some resources, hopefully if you have cattle or livestock, which includes buffalo too. They also have a hay lottery, which is being spearheaded by North Dakota Department of Agriculture. And for this, anyone can go in and enter for North Dakota, South Dakota, or Montana. This is what the website looks like. You click on the state, fill out a pretty simple form, and the deadline for entry is August 31st. So there's still a little bit of time to go out there and enter if you're in need of hay as well. It's another resource available to everyone in the region. Also on the agriculture side, the USDA Farm Service Agency, they have a number of drought relief programs focused on agriculture. If you participate in their farm program, they have some opportunities for low-cost loans, some other like livestock forage programs, some insurance, which you may have already known. But this includes, most of their stuff includes all livestock species. I know that's true for the livestock forage program down there, including cattle, buffalo, sheep, anything like that. So if you guys participate in those programs, there may be some resources or financial assistance available for you. They do have county offices, so that's who you'd have to contact to get more information there. Okay, looking ahead to the next 7 days or so, and then looking out beyond to the next season, here's what the total 7-day rainfall forecast looks like. So pretty limited there in Montana for sure. North Dakota, South Dakota, a little more optimistic. Looks like most of that rain is likely to happen here over the weekend, over the next few days. But maybe an inch to 2 inches in some of those areas. So, maybe we'll see a little more improvement down in South Dakota, maybe holding steady up there in North Dakota. Along with that, we've had cooler than average temperatures recently. It looks like we'll probably be more likely near average temperatures here as we get into the next week. This is looking at 8 to 14 days out, so about 1 to 2 weeks from now. On the left is temperature, and that gray area shows that more likely to be near average temperatures than anything else. And so that could be good news if you're looking for a little bit of warmth anyway. Out on the right side there, the green area in the Dakotas anyway, more favored to be wetter than average. That's precipitation. Again, this is the next 1 to 2 weeks out. Gray areas more likely to be near average for rainfall. So we'll see how that pans out as we get into that'd take us through middle of August. Looking further, so this was a climate outlook that was released back on last Monday, the 31st of July. Looking at temperature and rainfall for August as a whole, and at that time they were thinking Montana would be warmer than average or lean warmer than average, more likely than anything else. Not sure if that will pan out. We'll have to see how the end of the month works out. And then on the right side, they were generally leaning drier than average across northern Montana, northwestern North Dakota, which looks like it's probably pretty likely to hold true, at least given the current conditions and the outlook for the next couple of weeks. And then now they call this the seasonal outlook, looking at August, September, and October, all 3 months together. What might the end of the growing season look like as we get into fall? And at that time, this was back on July 20th, the most recent data available. And that time they were leaning warmer than average across at least most of Montana and the Dakotas, with higher likelihood there in western Montana. Again, this is for a whole 3-month period altogether, so you could have some cool and some warm periods in all those 3 months that can go up and down. On the right side, rainfall for those 3 months, they were saying at that time equal chances of being wetter, drier, or near average. So no real clear signal, so to speak, in the three-state region as far as rainfall goes to end our summer season. So crossing fingers, hopefully, that some of the drought conditions will ease as we get into fall, as fall moisture can set us up nicely for next season, for next spring, and hopefully bring back some better conditions for next year. Here are several links for more information if you're looking at the Drought Monitor or the National Integrated Drought Information System, that's drought.gov. There's also a place to report drought impacts if you'd like at the Drought Reporter website at University of Nebraska. And we have regional climate centers and some state resources as well that are available for drought management and drought response as we're kind of making our way through this season. So with that, I'd like to just end there for now in the interest of time. And this is a picture taken down right near Rosebud Reservation where I was a couple weeks ago. This is right before it rained. I appreciate your attention, and this is my contact information if you ever want to find me. I'm also on Facebook and Twitter. The links are there as well. So, Doug, I'll leave it for there if you want to take questions, or we can move to Rick and hold it for the end.
Yeah, thank you very much, Laura. I'm going to show a couple. Let's see, show my screen. There we go. A couple places that you may or may not be interested in, but I'm going to show you anyway. We regularly hold webinars similar to this, but much more broad. So if you're not familiar with our webinar series, we do it on a monthly basis. And if you would want to sign up for that, and it's not, again, it's not just focused on sort of the Northern Plains area or specifically dealing with tribes. It's a pretty broad discussion all the way from the Great Lakes to the Rockies. But at least you get sort of you get a feel for some of the outlooks and things like that, as well as conditions generally. That top place, that GoToWebinar place, is how to register for that. If you don't want to write all that down, just send me an email at doug.cluck@noaa.gov, and I'll put you on the list either way. The recording of this all these presentations will be at that site down below, the lower link down here. Whoops, yeah, I didn't mean to do that. Sorry, this lower link down here will be where we put all the recordings in case you wanted to get that. And now, give it a couple more seconds there. I'm going to change presenters to Rick. Rick, are you up and ready?
Well, I
Still alive?
think so.
Still alive
here.
there? Okay.
I'm, yes.
Here we go. I'm going to send that over to you.
All right.
You
now
just have to say yes. Yep.
Okay, and now I have to somehow find my desktop. Hang on. I can't. Trying to minimize the screen here.
Oh, well, you can just click on the presentation down below. It should pull up. The orange and white one. This has a P on it. The one with a P on it.
I don't see it.
I see it.
I do not.
Well, you can minimize this.
Hang on.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get to my desktop, and I'm failing miserably at doing it.
Okay.
Hang on.
There it is. There you go.
All right. Okay. Let's see here.
I know Rick won't say it, but Rick is has let's just say some back ailments, and he's doing this out of duress, and I'm thanking him very, very much for doing that. Anyway.
So, all right. I'm trying to get the screen to.
Yeah.
Right.
Lower bottom right corner. You
There we go.
Okay. Yeah, that's it. Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Take it away.
Thanks, Doug. Again, I'm Rick Nelson. I'm with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in Bismarck, North Dakota, and I'm filling in for a colleague today. I'm not Samantha Gibbs, obviously. Sam works in one of our wildlife health offices. She's actually a wildlife veterinarian, and she was going to talk more about wildlife diseases. That's not my area of expertise, but she did put together a few slides on some general concepts that I'm going to cover a little bit. But I'll start out by saying that for wildlife, and I'll include fish in here as well, although drought can have more severe short-term impacts on fish. But for wildlife populations, drought can be a good thing or a bad thing, and I'll give you a couple examples of that here as we go along. We're going to talk about the drought that's going on in the northern Great Plains. I'll start off by saying that at least in major parts of North Dakota, we went into February with a lot of snow on the ground. In fact, that was a huge wildlife issue up here because we had blizzards one after the other in December and January. In February, it all turned around. It got really dry, and it's been dry and getting drier ever since. So we'll talk a little bit about drought impacts on wildlife health, but wildlife in general and ecosystems in particular. So here we go. So one of the areas of concern for not only wildlife but for people and livestock as well is what impact water quality and quantity have on populations and even individuals. And right now in North Dakota, we've got these same kinds of harmful algae blooms going on that Sam's slide shows here in Florida. They look a little different. But because water levels have dropped precipitously in many of the wetland systems and in the intermittent streams in our part of the world, the quality of the water declines as well for a wide variety of uses. And again, because the systems draw down, we can see an increase in contaminant levels, which may or may not have direct impacts on fish and wildlife, but certainly can. And so again, the algae blooms that we're seeing up here and the warnings that we're getting in North Dakota from our health department have kind of widespread impacts for humans as well as animals. And just one example that's close to home for me is I train dogs for duck hunting. I haven't taken my dogs out this summer because of the algae blooms we're having. Now those things get worse in a drought, but they don't necessarily always result from a drought. But certainly when water levels decrease, the potential for those things to get worse certainly goes up. Of course, critters need space, and when space changes, you can have crowding results, you can have competition, aggression, and even dehydration going on. And then as things get drier and water sources dry up and change and food sources changes, we can often see more interactions between humans and wildlife that aren't always good. Of course, we don't have bears up in this part of the world, but we can get interactions with livestock and wildlife, particularly as we move into the fall season when food sources become scarce, and then wildlife can often compete with livestock for forage. So water quantity and quality. I'll give you an example though of how this isn't quite so cut and dried. So we've been in a pretty wet period, at least in parts of North Dakota, in what I'll call the prairie pothole region, for quite some time. And so our wetlands have been full. And so a drought actually has some benefits to wetlands in the long term because it draws them down, dries them out, allows the soils to be aerated. When they fill back up, all of those nutrients are released into the water column, and we get these tremendous blooms of invertebrates and plants that indeed are beneficial to waterfowl and other animals. And we haven't had one of those for quite some time. The last big drought, extended drought, was in the late 80s and early 90s, and we saw a lot of those systems dry out. When they filled up again, they became incredibly productive systems. They're not so productive anymore because they've been wet for some time. And so sometimes drought has beneficial effects for wildlife populations, especially in this part of the world, waterfowl that use wetlands. Again, the quantity and the quality of food can change dramatically in a drought. We're seeing that up here right now. Animals are pretty plastic. They can switch food sources. but sometimes the quality of those food sources isn't the same as it would be in non-drought years. And so indeed it does put stress on animals during a drought. And sometimes indeed they can consume things that are toxic, that can cause immediate problems or long-term problems, as we'll see in a minute. And animals move. Many animals can, some can't, but they will if they can, and they will move great distances to take advantage of conditions in different areas. When we have a widespread drought like we're seeing now in the northern Great Plains, it's harder for animals to move and find food sources, and so that also is a stress because they don't necessarily know that when they get where they're going, the conditions are going to be better. So a lot of times the higher energy expenditures can really have an impact on populations of organisms. In some areas, we can do things like put out water guzzlers for wildlife. That's not a real common practice up in this part of the world, but it does take place elsewhere. Sam would have talked in more detail about disease, and there's many wildlife diseases that affect both fish and wildlife, birds, ungulates, the whole bit. And many of these can be brought on or exacerbated by the conditions that drought brings forth in terms of space availability, crowding, more interactions between animals because they don't have the normal habitats they go to. The picture of the crowding of ducks on limited water sources is indeed an issue in our part of the world. We haven't had a big botulism outbreak up in this part of the world for some time, but those can occur more frequently during drought periods, but they're not necessarily always tied to drought. Hot, dry weather in the summers at this time of the year, which can be considered normal, can also result in outbreaks of botulism. Another aspect again that goes back to this movement of organisms for waterfowl, for example, when it's dry and birds come back to nest like they do every year, and if the spring is dry, the systems that they rely on, those seasonal and temporary wetlands, for example, that are dry in the spring that normally would have water, if those aren't available, birds will do what's called flyover. They'll keep going farther north until they either find good water systems or they don't. And then typically what happens is they just don't nest. And then they do crowd into areas where there is water. So there's all kinds of impacts of reduced food sources, reduced space. Closer proximity means potentially higher transmission of parasites and diseases within small populations, and so there can be some dramatic short-term effects. There are a number of mosquito-borne diseases that impact wildlife. There are a number of other diseases that impact wildlife as well. We haven't seen a huge outbreak of EHD lately, although we did have some of that up here last year and the year before. Haven't had a huge problem lately with some of the other mosquito-borne diseases with wildlife, but as things change, and again we see crowding with wildlife populations, we certainly can see an increase in those types of things like encephalitis. I mentioned botulism, and that has been a huge issue up here years ago in the late 80s and early 90s. Many of our national wildlife refuges had huge die-offs of waterfowl and shorebirds based upon botulism. Now this particular one is Salton Sea. Salton Sea has all kinds of problems that make the potential for botulism worse. But up in our area of the world, when we get these hot, dry conditions, drought conditions, we see the things that start to happen that result in a botulism outbreak. Organisms die either because of the drought or natural causes. They become covered with flies and maggots. There's a buildup of botulism toxin, and then the birds come along and feed on those maggots, pick up the toxin, and the disease just moves through the population pretty quickly. And you can have thousands of birds die off at a given refuge. I participated in one of the cleanup efforts at Long Lake National Wildlife Refuge during the drought of the late 80s, and we picked up hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dead birds. And it isn't really a very fun thing to do when it's 90 degrees out either. So, but we've had wet conditions for a while, so we haven't seen that. We're hoping we don't see big outbreaks of botulism currently, but it'll depend upon how long this drought lasts, and then how long it takes some of these systems to draw down to the point where they would start to see problems with botulism, because again, they're pretty full right now, even though we're in a drought. Drought is a stress, and stress is not a good thing, whether it's good stress or bad stress. Stress is stress. And so one of the longer term potential problems for organisms, be they aquatic or terrestrial, is the fact that when you're stressed, be you human or animal of another kind, your immune system is impacted, and immunosuppression can indeed be a big problem for wildlife that in normal times may be able to ward off some type of a disease or a parasite, but because of the stress from the drought conditions and suppressed immune system, susceptibility to some of those things can go way up. And we have seen that in the past, not only with droughts, but when we've had bad winters, same type of thing happens. So lack of food, having to move long distances for food, poor water quality or quantity, a number of factors can result in immunosuppression that indeed can negatively impact wildlife. And that's the last slide. One more example, again, related to what Laura talked about in terms of hay. And so right now we're seeing a shortage of hay up in this part of the world. And one of the activities that's taking place is that there's a lot of land being opened up to haying that otherwise wouldn't be. So conservation reserve program lands, a number of national wildlife refuges are allowing grazing to take place. Charlie Russell in Montana has opened up a big chunk of that refuge to ranchers to allow them to bring their cattle in to graze. And those types of activities, at least on national wildlife refuges, aren't necessarily with the normal operating procedure, but in these desperate times we do things differently. So, the bad news is there's a shortage of food for wild animals and domestic livestock, and so we're allowing those areas to be grazed or hayed. The good news is, though, that a lot of those grassland systems, the CRP areas, for example, have been sitting idle for many years, and they get decadent, and the quality of the habitat for wildlife declines in those long-term rest situations. So one benefit of what's going on right now in terms of opening those areas up is we're removing a lot of that decadent grass and baling it or allowing it to be grazed so that when we do get rain again, it will regenerate. Now, there's always a downside. So the downside also is that when we do those things, especially when we hay those areas, and we hay extensively like we do in major droughts, we go into the winter with reduced habitat. The quantity and the quality of the habitat is greatly reduced, which can indeed cause problems for winter survival. But hasn't happened yet, and we'll see. Hopefully we won't have a bad winter, and hopefully this drought will be not like the one we saw in the late 80s and early 90s. So with that, Doug, I'll turn it back over to you.
Hey, thank you so much, Rick. That was excellent. A good synopsis of impacts of drought. I see Kalani has had his hand up for some time. I'm going to go ahead and click on you, Kalani. I don't know if I can. I can't be. Yeah, it says you can't be unmuted until they enter your PIN, which might be 53 number sign. Otherwise, Kalani, your other way of communicating with us is through the. You can type in a question if you can do that in the question area. Anyway, I'm going to take back the presentation here real quick, show my screen, because we want to show Fort Belknap land, and we want Dennis. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, and I can hear you. Dennis, can you see my map? Or your map,
yes,
actually? All right. Why don't you take it away? Dennis is the climate change person, official, I guess you could say, for the tribe at Fort Belknap. and we've dealt with Dennis on a number of issues in the recent past. So Dennis has a sort of a synopsis on impacts, among other things, for their lands up there. So go ahead, Dennis. Just go ahead and start.
Okay. The Fort Belknap Indian Reservation is located in north central Montana, 43 miles from the Canadian border. The northern boundary, we have river valleys. The middle of the reservation are prairie plains. And in the southern boundary, we have mountain foothills. And as most of you might know, Fort Belknap is home of the Winters Doctrine, which established tribal water rights throughout Indian country. The main concern there was that the farmers were pumping water from the Milk River for their own use and leaving very little for tribal members that lived across the river at the time in the Milk River and still live here. And this prompted legal action that shared water use would have to be practiced. So with that said, I'll begin my presentation on the drought impacts. As most of you know, the Missouri River Basin drought hubs, climate and weather stations, and drought information programs have played a significant part in recording impacts and forecasting the drought we're in. And Laura filled us in on that, so thanks, Laura. And she also showed us the available areas where she got the information. It would probably take me a good part of the day to explain all of those, but anyway. Agriculture is the main thing that's affecting our reservation now from this drought, and pretty much the areas Laura talked about, we are included in that as well. I got a one-paragraph statement here. In July 2017, Montana counties east of us were in a drought-stricken area. However, 2 weeks later, our counties of Blaine and Phillips County were added to the list, and most of you know the impacts on our agriculture from that. The next one is fires. We are in fire restrictions as of now and continue to be in and out of red flag warnings. We did have a fire last month called the July Fire in our Little Rocky Mountains, and several range fires that are continuing to be our concern. And I just added recreation. Recreation is being affected now, and we probably won't see the full impact of that till the end of December, but impacts would be the hunting, fishing, and camping, and the loss of recreation dollars will continue to be added to this. Pathogen attacks and vector-borne diseases. I have been informing our tribal communities to watch for any unusual activity our wildlife might be experiencing. This could be a precursor to impacts related to pathogen attacks and vector-borne diseases. First one is epizootic hemorrhagic disease. It is a disease that targets white-tailed deer in our area. In 2012, I believe it was, we had this outbreak along the Milk River Valley in eastern Montana, but it mainly targeted the eastern half of the state, beginning here in Fort Belknap, and then it went east to Glasgow, Montana. Our whitetail population was hit real hard with this one, and the populations are just now recovering. However, it is anticipated that this disease might play out again in our area. So that's what we're going to continue to watch for, and this disease is caused by a virus that is spread by a black fly called the midge. Mosquitoes. We were noticing their migration patterns are shifting. Habitat increasing due to warmer average temperatures. As a former mosquito abatement manager, I can attest to the habitat shifting and the presence of new mosquito breeding areas in our mountain foothill areas of two of our tribal communities called Hayes and Lodgepole. The drought this year reduced their numbers. However, the heat and dry weather is a catalyst for vector-borne diseases and the West Nile virus. The West Nile virus was identified on August 4th, 2017, which was last Friday. to be in our mosquito pools that tested positive for the West Nile virus in both counties that are on our reservation, the Blaine and Phillips County. So with the cool weather that finally came to our reservation today, we were watching for that scenario where it gets cool and then it starts getting hot again, and then that's what drives the West Nile virus. So I'll be watching for that scenario, and I'll inform you on that later on. But the next one is waterfowl, and their migration patterns have been shifting around these last 2 years. Last year in 2016, we noticed one of the driest springs in recent years. There was no water at all in our prairie ponds and other depressional wetlands. Some wildlife species never returned from their annual migrations, which included our migratory waterfowl, which come here to breed and nest. We are in the Central Flyway, and most of the waterfowl that usually come here, like was explained earlier, kept heading north into Canada. And we also witnessed that the fall migration, when they go back south, did not happen in late August as it usually does, but in December and January, as we've seen large flocks of waterfowl flying overhead from Canada. Water resources. This year we had significant levels of water resources. However, due to the drought, our available water resources are just now beginning to dry up. Our tribe's plans are to explore new options as far as wells are concerned, and funding might play into this plan. So the question is, where will our tribes find funding to help with the water shortage, and will we get help like some of the farmers and ranchers? The next one is noxious weeds. Habitat is decreasing due to the drought, and noxious weeds are already getting a firm foothold on our reservation. We do have a noxious weed strategic plan that I helped develop with the help of the Center of Invasive Species Management in Bozeman, Montana, and the ladies there, Liz Galley-Noble and Kim Goodwin. As most of you know, weeds are opportunists, and this year's drought is just what they love. We need to establish an effective noxious weed program and hire a manager. So that's what we need if we are going to fight back and regain our foothold on our weed epidemic here on the reservation. Avian bird flu. This past winter on January 9th, 2017, the U.S. Department of Agriculture said it had detected a type of bird flu in a wild duck in Montana that appeared to match one of the strains found during an outbreak of the disease in 2014 and 2015, which led to the deaths of millions of chickens. No U.S. poultry have been found to be sick or dead from this disease in connection with the latest discovery, the USDA said. The mallard duck was harvested by a hunter in Fergus County, Montana, which is in the Central Flyway for migratory waterfowl, and this county is south of us. I can include the full story on this and then give it to Doug for distribution later. The next thing we're looking for was already spoken earlier about by Rick, the cyanobacteria, which is a naturally occurring photosynthetic bacteria found in many habitats, including recreational waters. They are a specific type of growth which is sometimes referred to as blue-green algae and harmful algae blooms, which can be potentially toxic. Under certain environmental conditions, such as elevated levels of nutrients, warmer temperatures, still water, and plentiful sunlight can promote the growth of cyano. In Montana, there are 3 species of blue-green algae, and only one of them have produced toxins that are detrimental to humans and livestock. And that's about all I have for the update from Fort Belknap. Doug?
Well, thank you very much, Dennis. Let's move on. Mafani, are you on?
Yeah, I'm on. Can you guys get me?
I hear you.
Okay.
Mafani represents Standing Rock, the Standing Rock tribe and is going to say a few words about some of the impacts that they've had to deal with.
So I am Mafani Mongo from Standing Rock. I'm a faculty at Sitting Bull College, and I've been working with the tribe for some time now on climate change related issues. Some of the members of committee could not be here today, so I am accepted to stand in for them. So as you guys know, Standing Rock, spans across the states of North Dakota and South Dakota, specifically Carson and Sioux counties, Carson County in South Dakota, and Sioux County in North Dakota. We have 8 districts on our reservation, and for the most part, the climate outlook given by Laura is pretty accurate. One of the things we noticed around here is there's a huge disparity in the small amount of rainfall we have had. Basically, most of the areas that have been impacted by the drought have really not seen a lot of the rain, and I'll expatiate on that a little bit later. But just as a brief summary, some of the outlooks, we looked at mainly 2 main issues that are popping up on Standing Rock. Of importance is the impact the drought is having on land management. It has been a big issue. And also, the other aspect which the tribe has been dealing with has to do with availability of water, not only for livestock, but also for people. I mean, you guys are all pretty familiar with what went on here a couple of months ago with the Dakota Access Pipeline. That has brought a lot of attention to water issues on Standing Rock. Has to do with quality, has to do with quantity also, And in a lot of ways, it has also made it possible that people get to start thinking about water, availability of water in terms of quantity and quality in a number of ways. So with the land issue, one of the things that has been reported, and we talked to the Bureau of Land Management here at the tribe, we've had a lot of conflicts that have emerged from leasing land, fee land, and tribal land, and due to the unavailability of water for a lot of pasture animals. It has been a big issue. I think in the last couple of months, they reported a couple of incidents. That has been a major concern to the tribe. And also, some of the things we have seen with that is we get instances of farmers actually, or ranchers actually selling off animals, and those have economic impact that are still being measured at the moment. The tribe has been trying to figure out ways in which they can basically help out ranchers, people using the land for their livestock. The other aspect we talked about was basically looking at a plan B for water resources. In the past, basically Standing Rock derives its water, its intake water line comes from the Missouri River. And historically, we've had instances in which the drought was so severe that water had to be brought in from other sources. So there has been a plan B option, which is currently being developed at the tribe to try and see how we can tap water from wells from an aquifer directly below the Missouri River. Obviously, as with other communities such as Standing Rock, funding is an issue, and the tribe's currently looking at ways in which it can fund this operation. Obviously, we have also other areas we can get water from, because the tribe actually beyond the Missouri River has the Cannonball River, has the Grand River. There's a couple of streams in between that we can tap for, but we need resources to do a lot of that. And the tribe is realizing that the drought, along with the Dakota Access Pipeline issue, has brought to the forefront a lot of these concerns that are tied to to water resources, water management, and how it impacts other communities. Now, the Plan B that was developed by the tribe is mainly for, human consumption, water supply for people in the community. And as of now, I don't think is anybody?
Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
I think you're breaking up a little bit. Sorry.
Oh, really? Can you get
going
clearly now?
I hear you now.
Okay. So the plans that are in place by the tribe actually are targeted mainly at community members, not at things like livestock and other areas. And as a researcher at the Tribal College here on Standing Rock, this summer I've been doing a lot of research tied to flow management on ranches. And some of the things we noticed at the tribal level or out in the pastures was a lot of dried out streams, a lot of the pots of water that were standing. We had a lot of them with algae growing on them, and that is not ideal for animals to use, and obviously most of the animals could not use these. So you get that extra stress which is put on the ranchers and people who are trying to get their animals to survive. We found ourselves actually trying to fill tanks on a daily basis for our bison population. We have about a couple of animals which are managed by the college. So that's just a personal perspective and something I got to see out in the field while I was working out with students. So other areas which are also very important that we talked about is developing an alternate source for landowners so that they can plan for water in cases when the animals and livestock don't have access to water. We know that game and fish at the tribe has reported also some issues. The drought is kind of negatively impacting some of the work they're doing in the community. And some of the concerns that were brought up by community members, we have obviously we're getting into that fire season, and there's a concern about that. There's also the low water supply for cattle that has been, it's an ongoing problem, and community members are trying to figure out how, the tribe's going to help them, proceed into the month of December. We're also talking about the shortage in hay caused by, the drought. We know that most of the pastures have not been very productive on Standing Rock. I mean, we are classified as land that's suitable for ranching, but this year has been kind of an issue with a lot of the pasture quality that we're seeing. And also, water quality issues. We know that, I want to say Rick talked about water quality and its impact on animals when you look at diseases. That has also been a very huge concern. So beyond this, I think I kind of don't have anything more. So I don't know.
No, that's good, Mafane. I think that's a pretty holistic view of the conditions there and some of the challenges the tribe has had, at least in the Standing Rock region, at least. And I'm sure your issues were similar to what was on Cheyenne River as well.
Yeah, it's about the same, and we're not very far from Cheyenne River. It's
right.
One of the concerns we have also is, as mentioned up in Fort Belknap, it's the issue of water use on the Missouri, which is some other political issue that the tribe has been trying to address, especially with a lot of the that are being made to get water from the Missouri River to help other communities. But that's something that has a long-term impact, which we're looking at, especially as the drought monitor and the drought issues we're facing on Standing Rock are becoming really real to us.
Yep. Well, I want to thank you, Mufani and Dennis, if I haven't thanked you already, for the input from those two tribes. We're going to shift slightly over to James Rattlingleaf, who's down in Pine Ridge today, and all the other folks actually in Pine Ridge today. So James is going to give us a synopsis of some of the work that is going on with 4 tribes, part of the Great Plains Tribal Water Alliance, in South Dakota, mainly focused on South Dakota, those 4 tribes. James, can we hear you?
Doug, can you hear me?
Yes. Go ahead, James, and take it away.
Well, thank you, Doug, and greetings to everybody again on the call today. As Doug mentioned, I work with the Great Plains Tribal Water Alliance. If those on the call who remember the Minnesota Water Coalition back in the day, I've been calling this organization sort of a reboot or a Minnesota 2.0. It's focusing on tribes within the Missouri River Basin to help prepare, plan for, and deal with those water resource issues that are most important to the tribes. The Great Plains Water Alliance 2 years ago the leadership decided to pursue a climate change adaptation strategy. And within that strategy was to find resources. So the BIA Climate Resilience Program came online about 3 years ago under President Obama. It was a grant program to help prepare tribes and tribal leaders to bring in climate data, technology, and science into decision making at the middle line management place or position. And so the Alliance was successful in getting 2 proposals funded. One was for helping develop drought vulnerability assessments on 4 reservations in South Dakota, as Doug mentioned. The other one was to do a drought summary, which is somewhat of a seasonal forecast that brings in different climate variables that the tribes are interested in tracking and monitoring, so that they can help plan for the coming year, whether it's grazing, whether it's ag, fish and wildlife, health, water. That's the second component. The third component really is to help develop a guidebook that those tribes that are interested in working with the Alliance, can have access to a guidebook, which the guidebook is a process to help do their own vulnerability assessments and also do their own climate summaries. To date, we are on Pine Ridge today to meet with the tribe and tribal programs and tribal communities to talk about drought and drought impacts to help inform this drought vulnerability assessment. We completed Rosebud, Standing Rock, and Flange Santee Sioux this past month. I was excited about this project because the Great Plains has a climate internship program. So we have 2 interns with us today that are working on this, leading the charge and developing and drafting the first cut at a vulnerability assessment. And so this is a youth emphasis on this, because the BI Climate Resilience Program supports that idea of having youth engaged to do real work in their tribal communities. So we're doing that work now. We're learning a lot about what tribes are interested in, what they're experiencing, and their ideas about how to mitigate or prepare or what I would say recover from droughts, which is, I think, a key component to all this work. This is partnership driven. So we work with Doug Cluck and NIDIS, as was mentioned earlier, Laura Edwards, climatologist for South Dakota. We work with Louis Berger, a private company. We work with the National Drought Mitigation Center at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and the High Plains Climate Science Center. Again, just demonstrating again the power of collaboration, that we all can't do this by ourselves, and we invest in each other, we invest in the communities, so that as we meet with them, we're sharing information, we're sharing experiences, and certainly we're sharing the ideas of how to deal with drought. So I'll stop there, Doug. I know it's a quick, dirty overview, but then I'll leave room for questions. So thank you.
Thanks, James. That was great as well. Anybody is there any interest in anybody from Pine Ridge saying a few words about conditions down there, or any challenges they've had?
Yeah, this is Kyle White from Oglossie Tribe Natural Resources Regulatory Agency. I just want to talk a little bit about the drought that we're experiencing down here. It's not too severe, but up there in the, let's see, it would be the northeast corner of our reservation up by that Wombly area. We had the Wombly fire that started somewhere around July 16th, and we weren't cleared to go out there until July 25th to go and assess the area. But it was approximately 5,300 acres that was burned. It was in our forest region, and a lot of that was in our timber reserve area. We did have a lot of leased land up there for grazing. We did have one casualty. One of the ranchers' cows broke its leg. So, and then we're looking at there's a naturally fed dam in that burn area from a natural spring that waters high quality water. And the burn severity was pretty high, so we're looking at some erosion issues and potential threats to that water. So the BIA Bear team, they're finishing up their report. I think they're gonna have it finished. I think it was today. They're gonna be done, or tomorrow. But that was one of the areas that we wanted them to focus on for erosion control, so that way we can kind of mitigate that surface water runoff from the grazing, and so we can go back in there and do our reforestation. But July 17th, the chairman, Chairman Weston, he issued a burn ban, and we've been in burn ban until further notice. But the other areas, I mean, we're not too bad. You do see some effects of it. Some of our fruiting trees that we use, the choke cherry, there are areas where they have not fruited. But other than that, there isn't too much, I guess you would say, impacts the drought to our forested areas. It's still pretty green in those areas. A lot of what had happened was it was just kind of the right conditions. That grass was dried out in that area where that fire happened, and it was super windy that day. I think the winds were like in the 30s and 40s. Wow. And that timber area is one of the areas that was identified for forest thinning, and there was a lot of pretty thick needle bed down there, so that caused a lot of the burn severity to the soil. Yeah, there's you see some lower water levels around the area and stock dams, and some of our other community dams that we have. So it's definitely present, and you can see signs of it. And we do get thunderstorms varied around the area in the afternoon, but it's intense and it's short. So
yeah. All right. Thank you, Kyle. So I'm going to open this up to anybody else on the call. You got to raise your hand or let me know one way or the other if there are any questions. And I do apologize for those folks who didn't put in their PIN number. So if you raise your hand, I can't unmute you. I don't know where that PIN number is. For me, it was 53 # or something like that. Anybody else have any questions or anything like that on the that they'd like to ask, or comments for that matter? If you're from especially if you're from a different tribe and you want to talk a little bit about some of the trials and tribulations you guys have had to deal with. Or anybody on the panel for that matter, if there's anything else you'd like to add. Okay. I don't see anybody wanting to comment. Well, I will reiterate a couple things. First, I'm going to throw this back up here. Next week, on the 17th, actually the same time we held this one this week, at 1 p.m. If you're not familiar with this, there is a webinar series that we do, and Brian Fuchs from the National Drought Mitigation Center in Lincoln, Nebraska is going to be doing this one. So I bet he talks a bit about the Northern Plains drought, because that's the big story this summer anyway, pretty much for across the central part of the U.S. In terms of there's quite a bit of flooding east of here, of course, where they don't need any more water. But in this part of the world, a little bit of flooding rain might be kind of nice these days. So that's the top URL there, and the bottom one again is where we're going to put this recording, and it'll be there either tomorrow or Monday, I imagine, on that website, in case you want to share that with anybody or listen to it for some reason again, because we all sound so good. So at that, since there's anybody else have any comments, any of the panelists? Okay. I do want to thank you all, and if you found this useful to you, let us know. Let me know. I appreciate hearing that. It helps us keep these going and all that kind of stuff. So have a great afternoon, and I'll see some of you in the near future. Thank you very much. Have a good day.